Welcome to Funkatopia WTF. I hope you guys are doing fantastically well. I am your host, Mr. Christopher. Oh, look.
I'm trying to get it right. Okay. Yes. Yes. Kind of indie face. Indie face. Yes, indie face.
Welcome to Funkatopia. I am your host, Mr. Christopher. This is my hero friend, Mr. Michael Bland in the house.
Hey, y'all.
Ribbed for your pleasure.
Oh, my goodness.
I hope you guys are doing well. Listen, we have got a really, really special show for you guys today. Both Michael and I have been talking offline, and we're both just beside ourselves because there is a legend, icon, visionary in the house. I mean, it is an honor to have back on the show, literally a true music pioneer. I mean, many people know him from hits like One of Our Submarines, Hyperactive, and of course, She Blinded Me with Science. But our guest today is much more than that. He's a singer, songwriter, producer, technologist, professor, author, quite literally, as I said, a musical visionary. Ladies and gentlemen, let me please welcome the one, the only, Thomas Dolby in the house. Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah. How are you, sir? Where are you calling us from?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland right now, which is my sort of home during term time. I teach at the university here. Also have a home in England, which I usually go back to in the summer, but I'm in Baltimore today.
I'm just kind of curious, why isn't it Sir Thomas Dolby yet? Or what are we waiting for here? I mean,
well, my official title is professor, although there's not always that item in a pull-down menu when you're trying to book a table in a restaurant that's sold out. So professor doesn't always cut it.
Well, the last time that I had you on the show was 13 years ago, and maybe you weren't aware, but on my end, it was total chaos. We didn't do, back then it was only audio. I occasionally did video, but and you were working with Skype. And I had never used Skype before. I was primarily, again, doing audio podcasts back then. But so it was like, and the connectivity stuff was an issue. So you flash forward to me sitting in my hot car in my driveway on my cell phone via Skype because of the time difference at that time, using one of those phone recorders. I mean, it was just chaos, but it was a great interview anyways, but it took all of my wits not to fanboy, but I'm calm now. Maybe, I don't know. Anyways, I was so excited to also discover that you had written 2 books because, I mean, I love your writing style. I ordered both of them because for whatever reason I had no idea that they even existed. I don't know if it was your marketing or because I was just me being oblivious, probably the latter. But I'm really kind of curious regarding your new book, Prevailing Wind. And it's set in 1913 around World War I that follows the story of 2 brothers. Can you kind of give a synopsis of what this book is about? We're going to tap on your music for sure, because that's what we're going to geek out on. But I really am interested how you got into wanting to write this fiction piece and talk about that.
Yeah. So Prevailing Wind is a historical fiction novel. It took me about 5 years to write it. It's always been in the back of my mind. And I finally sort of got the chunk of it done during COVID and got it finished and got it out. I've always been fascinated with classic wooden sailing boats, and the zenith of the prime era for those was probably pre-World War I, when you had New York Yacht Club members who were robber barons, the Astors, Vanderbilts, Carnegies, and so on, who were basically sort of competing out on New York Harbor with these enormous mega yachts, which were useless for anything other than sail racing. And these boats took a crew of up to about 40, 45 men. And they weren't other New York Yacht Club members with their soft hands. They were hardened Maine lobster men that the millionaires would hire to man their ships for them because they worked together great as a team. They had leathery hands already. And they were churchmen. So at night, they would lay in their hammocks and read their Bible instead of going out and getting drunk. And they work very cheap. And so they would be the crews on these billionaires' mega yachts. And the sort of peak of the competition was the America's Cup, which, as you may know, has been going for 160 something years, which used to be versus the Brits. It's now an international thing. But in those days, it was basically British challengers and American defenders. And my novel, Prevailing Wind, follows the story of two brothers from a little fishing village in Maine called Deer Isle, who are lucky enough to get signed up for the crew of an America's Cup defender. And it follows their story as they go to New York to train for this. And in the end, and this is all sort of based on historical fact, the America's Cup of 1914 never took place because war broke out in the middle of the series. So after that, it becomes more fictional and sort of an imaginary outcome of what might have happened. And yeah, that's the story. It's really about rich and poor. It's about man versus nature. It goes into a lot of detail about the sailing yachts and how you would sail them with all of these crews. Yeah, I think it's a good read. It's especially good for people that are into maritime fiction, but it's hopefully universal enough that anyone can enjoy it.
So when you're writing something like this, I mean, I've kind of was looking at, you seem to have a heightened interest in those early 1900s history-wise, but before I ask that one question, do you have to beef up your terminology as far as what you're referring to as the maritime fiction type of stuff? I mean, did you were you fully aware of all the different terminologies and stuff, or did you have to do a bunch of research before you wrote this?
I did a bunch of research, and that was the funnest thing to do. It's just great. It's like I had to go to Deer Isle, Maine, and I had to go to the New York Yacht Club, and I had to go to Bermuda, and it was all a tax write-off because it was the costs of the book. So it was great. Right. And I would get there and I'd wander around with a notebook and note down little details that I could use in the story. But yeah, I mean, fortunately, there are still some wooden sailing yachts going, often, still owned by millionaires who, fancied the era. And so the men that sail them, I was able to tap their brains about what it actually takes to race them and what actually happens.
So, I mean, even the golden age of wireless, I mean, you had a lot of references to radio technology and aircraft and naval submarines and things like that. And of course, now you have Prevailing Wind, which is a whole book around that. When did your fascination start with that specific era, or is it just happenstance that the theme just always seems to come up in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated with sort of alternative realities. What if the Germans had won World War II and Britain was an occupied country? Would I be in a basement in the underground, sort of broadcasting anonymously for the resistance? What would happen if there was a global apocalypse and we woke up and there was no power? Those kinds of things always appeal to me as a backdrop for either fiction or for a song. But I mean, I think the Prevailing Wind setting was pretty surreal in of itself, just the extremes of rich and poor. You had, 1910s, you had immigrants pouring into New York, often living in tenement slums, some of them working on the railroads that were owned by the robber barons. And, the membership of the New York Yacht Club collectively had more power and wealth than the US Treasury and the government at that point. And they paid no income tax, interestingly. So you had women's rights, you had the Triangle Shirt Fire Factory, you had, paid militias slaughtering mine workers in Colorado. There was a lot of extraordinary stuff going on.
Wow, that's good. Yeah. I mean, I was watching some show. It was one of those, post-apocalyptic type shows. I think it was The Last of Us. I started rewatching that series again. And I always think, do I need to that's obviously zombie stuff, but I was like, do I need to be a prepper? Do I need to have a bunch of canned goods? It's
dystopian.
It's crazy, right?
Dystopian entertainment scares the crap out of me, man.
It's a lot.
It gets my mind. I go to a dark place.
I
never go to this bright place where it's oh, everything is different now. Look how technology has just taken over. What a lovely. It's never that. It's always just doomsday.
And the weird thing is, it's like those dystopian scenarios, they start to get tepid when real life overtakes them. You go back and watch some of those things and you go, well, that's nothing.
Right,
compared to
exactly.
what's
Then you
actually
realize where
going
we
on in the world.
actually are. It's
Yeah. It's like
That's
you remember
great.
West Wing and the House of Cards and everything and how shocking that was at the time. You can't watch those now because yeah, and
Yeah, right. It's completely ineffective.
Yeah.
It's all been neutered, basically.
Right. So, and just so our listeners know, and our viewers also, if you have any interest whatsoever in picking up Thomas's book, please do so. Obviously, we all know that he is a phenomenal writer. It's just the nature of his artistry. And if you want some, funkatopia.com/Dolby. Again, that's FUNKATOPIA.com/Dolby will take you right to the Amazon page where you can pick up the book. Hardcover, softcover, Kindle, whichever. I prefer Kindle because I can take it everywhere. Actually, you can't take a book everywhere, but it's a little easier to keep up with. Let's shift to music here because
Well, can we?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Michael. You're just as much a fan as I am. I know, man. I know. Go.
Just about the fact that the ocean scares me so much. Like, you seem to have a fascination. Is it a fascination with the unknown, or is it a fascination with? I mean, me. It's like I guess I was in Italy one time in a town called Viareggio, and they had a promenade. And me and Sonny, the bass player you saw with me when I played with Prince when you came to the show, we went out like 4:30 in the morning and went down there, and it was like I stood at the Mediterranean and heard, first off, stereo imaging, like just like in nature. That was enough to kind of just wig me out. Just listening to an ocean, standing in front of it and just going, wow. And then it was like 4:30 in the morning. So it was like, it's dark out here. I've seen too many Godzilla movies. What if there's a squid right there? I've got to go back to the hotel right now. I don't know why, but I mean, I guess that's probably why the ocean scares me so, but you seem to just embrace it, man. In your work, you're always talking about, uncovering things and, just, were you a sleuth? Are you a Sherlock Holmes fan?
Yeah, I mean, I love Sherlock Holmes. Absolutely. It fascinates me and it scares me. I mean, in the same camp as you are. Really, it's like it can take you anywhere. It's got all these secrets that we don't know. There's probably still stuff down there that we haven't discovered yet. So many great stories, of human resilience and survival and navigation is just amazing to me. And the fact that the world used to be so much a bigger place. There'd be a British sailing warship, in Nelson's times, the South Pacific, and it would take 3 months for the news to get to them that the war with France was now over.
Sure.
And they would send letters to their loved ones, and they sent like 6 copies, via different little packets to different islands on the way, hoping that one of them would make its way back to England. And every morning they get out there and have parades, and read the articles of war and salute the flag, and it's just an amazingly different time, in a way, like a parallel universe to what we have going on now.
Wow. Considering how, I'm sorry, Chris, I don't mean to.
No, don't play. Go ahead.
I guess your fascination, well, I guess you probably have a technology for you is like things old, things future, things, everything in between is all fair game for you in your work. I'm realizing that you have as much fascination probably about a steamship as you do about, the next supercomputer to come on the market.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about technology is it's what you do with it. And the effort that people put into figuring out the implications of a new technology. And I think, the role of artists really is to reveal to the world the upside of a new technology. I mean, take AI as like obviously very, very in our faces now. And most of what you read about it is the paranoia, privacy, the machines are going to take over. You don't know if you're talking to a human or a machine. Who gets to program them? What is truth? All of those questions are really, are they going to put people out of work? I'm fascinated with the creative possibilities of AI, not to replace my own creativity, but as yet one more new tool that I can play around with. When I first discovered synthesizers, samplers, MTV videos, the internet, video games, I would always see these technologies when they were very young and emergent. And I just feel that my role and the role of artists in general is to say, before you stamp these things out because you're terrified of them, look at what you can do with them. That's always been my thing. And I love being one of the first idiots to dive in there at risk of making a fool of myself. It's like I'm really motivated. I'm basically a show off, right? But I'm motivated more by the fear of like falling flat on my face and looking like an idiot than I am by the glittering prize, by the Grammy, by the $1 million, by the Oscar. Those kinds of things are not what get me up in the morning. What gets me up in the morning is thinking, God, if I lay here in bed, I'm going to miss an opportunity of using this new technology and doing something mind-blowing with it before anybody else figures it out.
Sure. Wow. Yes. How do you, one more question. I'm sorry, Chris. I know you have a,
no,
that's
why he's here.
How do you process? Do you have a relationship with entropy? Like, are you fascinated with the way things break down?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm amazed by that. I mean, I'm not really political in terms of sort of day-to-day politics, but I'm fascinated with the way people sort of brainwash themselves, really, and my observation about everything that's going on in the world now is this more as like I'm just an observer of culture and, the way humans process things. I find that really fascinating. So yeah, I mean, I'm also, I'm keen to know how this is all going to end.
Right. We die.
We always say that.
Well, I mean, recently, Brian Cox, who is like a famous British astrophysicist, astronomer, who actually used to be in an indie rock band in Manchester, but he's like a TV personality, like a TV scientist in the UK. I was on his website, and he was talking about, the probability that this asteroid that's heading for Earth, was going to collide with us was like up to 2.2% or something like that. And, he asked for any comments, and people were saying, hey, Brian, could we nuke it? Could Elon send up a spaceship and divert it? And I'm saying, Brian, what could we do to increase the probability above 2.2? Because it would really be the best way if it just ended like in a snap.
Yeah, how about let's just
get out of this nightmare.
Yes, level the playing field, literally.
That's right.
I don't disagree. I often think it's time to start over.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I do find it interesting, Michael, what you were asking about, because there is like that dichotomy there that, Thomas, your interest in that specific era back then, but you were also the same guy who was on the total opposite side, just looking at advancements in technology and I mean, it's unusual that you're rooted in both worlds, and it's a unique balancing act for sure. I think it's even more intriguing because I think there's a lot, we learned from history, and there's a lot of good takeaways there, I'd imagine, that you can apply to, things that you're doing now. I mean, you're a professor at Peabody, right?
I'm Peabody
Institute.
Johns Hopkins.
Johns Hopkins. Yeah. So, and you've been there for over a decade now, and was it the Music for New Media program? What is the curriculum, music and technology? What is it that you're specifically doing there?
So really, we're training composers to work to picture, whether it's film, TV, video games, installations, things like that. And, I mean, being good at writing for picture is a different skill set from just making good music. A lot of great composers have had a go at doing a film score. You've had Prokofiev, Leonard Bernstein, etc. And they did one score and one score only, because you get really beat up, and like in that industry. And if you think you're going to write your masterpiece right off the bat, forget about it. It's more about writing the correct piece of music for a scene versus writing a great piece of music. If you're lucky enough to end up in a partnership, the way, a lot of people actually from our world, Michael, have crossed over, like Danny Elfman, Hans Zimmer was a rocker originally.
Oh, sure.
Trevor Rabin, Trent Reznor, and Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead. These guys have all done great film scores, but they're untrained musicians. That they're not, they can't, write out an orchestral score, but they know all of the parts, and they're actually, very imaginative, and they've established themselves now in Hollywood, which is great. But then you also get the old school. You get the John Williams of the world, who did come up through conservatories and conduct their own work and do their orchestrations and so on. But some of the kids that I recruit, some of them have played violin since they were 5 years old, and others got into Mario, when they were 10, and then got their own first computer, and they got some software, and they started, they learned from YouTube tutorials, and they're now writing great music, and they've had no training whatsoever. So I've got a full spectrum, and fortunately, Peabody have given me the latitude to recruit somebody that I think is really talented, that doesn't have that kind of conventional background. Although there's 800 musicians at Peabody that have grown up with it, this is really their life.
Now, is there a reason why you're focusing on people that don't have that conventional background? Is it has something to do with, a little bit more loose on the creativity side? Or why is it that you're focusing on those types of individuals?
I wouldn't say I focus on them. I can relate to them because that's me as well. I'm more about my ears, about intuition. Rock musicians have we have our own language. You might, I suppose a typical professional might be able to read a chord chart, Michael, but they're not probably going to read notation. But we have a way of talking about things, and your old boss, Michael, would have his little signals for you guys, and it's sort of different. It's different language from the language of the symphony, but it is a language nonetheless. And there isn't a correct or an incorrect way of doing things. But I tend to focus on people that have great intuition and great imagination versus people that have just purely spent years reading the rule book. There are no rules, basically. You throw them out. It's like jazz. There's a framework for it that you can learn, and that's helpful, but it's not essential.
Yes, it's more important to have the creative impulse, I think. Because you can teach anyone how to express themselves, but they've got to understand what they feel first. Like, what are they trying to say? What are they trying to?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And many consider, you to be, one of those individuals that's, I guess, for lack of a better term, groundbreaking, just because of all the boundaries that you keep pushing. Hence the title of your first book. And I think that's great that you've decided, that's going to be my thing. I'm going to, keep pushing those boundaries of music and technology. And if you consider me innovative, cool, just being kind of consciously aware that you're doing things musically that maybe nobody else is doing. And certainly, Michael and I were talking a little bit before you came on. We were talking a little bit about Peter Gabriel and how he's also another one of those individuals. And, there's other musicians at the same time in the 80s, but did you ever find yourself thinking, how am I going to keep up with that? People like Peter Gabriel, people like Prince. Is there anyone out there specifically that you think, man, I just really wish that I had that person's mindset or their resources? Is there anybody specific that you're just like, wow, that you kind of hold in reverence?
That's not many of them. You just named two. Brian Eno was a big hero of mine.
Brian, yeah.
David Bowie was a big hero. But at the same time, I like diverse, different. There's not one single style of musical era of music that I love. I was always a huge Joni Mitchell fan. I was always a big Van Morrison fan. Kraftwerk, Frank Zappa. A bunch of different people. And if they have anything in common, it's that they were all sort of mavericks. They were all outside of a genre. boy, when I was growing up, I took no notice of how many records they were selling, whether they were on the radio. In a way, if it was like a private thing to me, that I could like lock myself away and like read the inner sleeve on the albums, and listen to the music. I liked that it was a personal thing to me. It would have sort of spoilt it somewhat if they'd been everywhere. Everybody was listening to them. So I've always had this sort of private relationship really with the music that I love.
Wow, that's I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned Joni Mitchell, and we were just talking about this last week, which is what prompted me to reach out to you, is that I found out that you were inspired by Joni Mitchell's Hissing of Summer Lawns, is what I heard in some interview, that it was actually one of the inspirations for Golden Age of Wireless. Can you explain, first off, is that true? And what was it, in what way was it inspirational? Lyrically, musically, the whole package? What about this album?
A lot of things, really. I mean, there's half a dozen Joni albums that were a huge influence on me. But there was something about the atmosphere of that album, the title song, Edith and the Kingpin, Shades of Scarlet Conquering, and the Jungle Line, which is like one of the weirdest things that Joni ever did, using synths, not very well, in my opinion. That's one of the reasons I wanted to work with her. It's like, no, let me handle those knobs.
Right.
Okay. But she also was based around like a Burundi, drum beat. And this was long before, Adam and the Ants and people like that did that in the 80s, like went for that Burundi sound. I loved the atmosphere. I loved her approach to LA and Hollywood, which was this sort of shimmering, a lot of imagery of like, the Hissing of Summer Lawns refers to the sprinklers, the sort of, the mist rising off some of those properties because of the sprinklers, and it had this interesting sort of mirage effect to it, which I liked.
I want to say now that you've mentioned Joni, I think I understand Screen Kiss a little better. As a piece, as a work, because when I was, I just turned 56 this month, but the first time I heard the Flat Earth, I was 16, 16 or 17, and a lot of the content went over my head. I think I was not in an intellectual place to understand really what you were talking about, in some sense. But the music just had me captivated, and the way that you sort of blended, like, I guess what would that have been? It was the 808, the Roland 808, or was it but with an acoustic piano, and with just the fact that you just mashed things together. It really just, but Screen Kiss, I'm thinking now of Hajira. I'm thinking,
great album.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that let me see. I'll just.
Oh, you're gonna play it? That's one of my absolute favorites.
So you mentioned the Hajira album, Michael, which is a couple of albums after Hissing of Summer Lawns, and in my opinion, her best. And part of that was, she always played off her sidemen, but she worked with Jaco Pastorius, who was an absolute genius. And one of the notable things was the way that his bass sort of soared. It was playing the role of a bass, but it was simultaneously soaring sort of like a cello or something like that. Just had this gorgeous modality to it. And he would sort of play across the chords, and it was just sort of magic. But when I came up with Screen Kiss, so basically, I had this chord sequence, and I just had this sustained chord, but I messed around with the bass parts a little bit, sort of like Jaco's. So it's just basically that chord is holding all the way through, but then the bass is going.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the chord is sustained, but the bass is moving around like it's playing a sequence, but
Yes.
the chord is sort of spelled by these notes of voice on a fairlight that are just drifting in and out, like this sort of legato sequence, drifting in and out. And then also it's like the transitions. There are some fairly weird chord changes, like to get from the chorus back to the verse. It is quite a strange change. So it's like the bass, so the chorus is going. So
Right.
actually, I wasn't quite. Something like that. Anyway, like the bass is basically playing the role of sort of the glue, like gluing together these quite complex chords. So yeah, I mean, huge, kudos to Joni there, and she took note. Somebody, tipped her off about me, and she got very excited and checked me out, and she heard that album, and she invited me to go and work with her, and it was a catastrophe.
Really? What was a catastrophe? What happened?
That is a whole other podcast, man.
Oh, maybe this is why he gets along with Andy Partridge.
Okay, yeah,
Do you?
we're gonna talk about Andy here in a second because
Everything I heard about him and Rundgren fighting during Skylarking, it's like, wow.
Right, exactly. That's that's one of the topics I wanted to talk about too. Was that?
Are you comfortable discussing that?
Well, first off, Todd was very, very overbearing. According to Andy, was very, very overbearing when they were recording Skylarking. And then I saw, which I didn't know, I saw that you had worked with Todd, and I was just like, how was it working with him? Is he difficult to work with? Is he, I mean, some artists are just like that. They're just in their own space.
Yeah, I mean, he's a brilliant musician, brilliant guy, and he knows it. He lacks a certain humility, in my opinion. Very, very talented. I mean,
that's what they said.
I shared some tracks with him, which he sort of doctored and put a version of a demo that I'd done on his last album. But actually, the only time I've really worked with him was he was involved in a Bowie tribute tour with a bunch of sort of ex-Bowie sidemen, and they asked me to go down when they played locally here in Annapolis. They asked me to go down and do a couple of songs, and one of the ones I wanted to do was Quicksand, and I thought it'd be really nice if Quicksand with just me and Todd on stage, so him playing acoustic. And Quicksand, back in those days, Bowie wrote quite complex chord sequences with lots of diminished chords and things like that. And it required Todd to do a little bit of homework, to sort of learn the chord sequence. And he never really did. So it's like the sound check was a bit of a disaster. And so after the sound check, I sort of go into this dressing room, which he had a private dressing room in this little club. And, he had the only dressing room, and the other 8 people in the band had to like change in the storage closet. But he was in there in his personal dressing room doing Sudoku. And I sort of wandered in and said, hey, we got a couple of hours before sound check. Should we figure out these chords for Quicksand? And he was
want to work this out? Work out this lot?
Nah, not really.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my.
And I thought, okay, he's a perfect. It's like this guy, he knows he's going to be fine on the night, So we get on stage, and he's like trying to squint at this chord chart, and he's going, okay, that's the diminished. Is that? It's like, which diminished chord is it we're talking about here? Well, you only got a choice of 3. Take your pick. How far wrong can you be? But no, I mean, so we had a good laugh. He's he's certainly a character.
No,
I could understand though a little bit of what Andy had been through on Skylarking.
I got it. I understand. I see.
Yeah. So what is your relationship like with Andy? Because I mean, I love Andy, but I've never met him. And of course, Michael and I are huge XTC fans. But I also know from, following his tweets and some of the things he says, he's also got a little bit of a personality, shall we say.
Yeah, he's always me a little pointy in interviews even. So, I mean, but that's all right. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. He's just a certain type of person.
Yeah,
I mean,
how
is
he?
With the pointiest. So,
yeah, Prince is up there for sure.
I mean, to be honest, I never had anything but fun with Andy. I was a very early XTC fan. I used to follow them around when they were playing pubs in London. they had a keyboard player at the time, Barry Andrews, and I knew every one of their songs, and I would go there sort of hoping that Barry would like keel over with a aneurysm or something, and Andy would go, "Does anybody know the keyboard parts?" Like,
wait, that's not the Barry Andrews from like Shriekback, is it?
Yeah, same guy. Yeah.
Whoa! Oh man!
Yeah, he used to be their keyboard player. Yeah. If you listen to their early albums, like they did a cover of Watchtower, and there's a lot of organ on that. So he played mainly like a Vox organ. And
we were talking about that cover, that punk cover. No need to get excited. The cover of Watchtower.
They eventually, I read in the papers that Barry Andrews had left the band, and I thought, okay, this is my moment. And then they replaced him with another guitarist. But I got to, so I was playing with a guy called Bruce Woolley at the time. We got a gig supporting XTC right when they broke through. Yeah. So it's like their song "Making Plans for Nigel" was the first chart hit they had in the UK. I remember walking into the first sound check and hearing that guitar riff, and I was just in heaven. So yeah, I got to be friendly with them. I think Andy liked me, and he produced a couple of demos for me. This is when I was just starting out. Played some harmonica on Europa, and he's always been a great ally, and I've never had anything but fun with him. But I've never, I think probably commercially what held them back was the fact that he had this severe stage fright, and so they were a fantastic live band, and he was an awesome live musician. He used to do the Chuck Berry duck walk, during these incredible solos. I don't know if you've ever tried to do a duck walk. It's not as easy as it looks.
It's so unusual about him too, because when you hear songs like like their cover of Watchtower, which I was it's kind of like this punky version that they did, and also songs like Train Running Low on Soul Coal, just like the way that he kind of just comes out, and he's so out there, and he's such a forward singer. It really just surprises me that he's like that.
It's like he's performing all the time. Almost.
Yeah, it's that's somebody who's completely.
His vocal.
He's so comfortable.
But yeah,
it's just unusual.
Yeah,
that's crazy. That's great to know, though. And Michael told me about Andy. You divulged that Andy played harmonica on Europa and the Pirate Twins. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that. Mm-hmm. That's cool, man. That's very, very cool. What were you going to ask, Michael? I'm sorry.
I was going to ask a little bit more about Bruce Woolley. Just because I've seen his name on a lot of records, but I don't know where he comes from. The first time I saw his name mentioned was, I think, on "Slave to the Rhythm" by Grace Jones.
Yeah, which he co-wrote.
Is he a member of Art of Noise?
No. He was in an early incarnation of Buggles with Trevor Horn and
that's
Jeff
those
Down.
two. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, and I think they met. He's a songwriter first and foremost. They'd written a hit single for, I think, Tina Charles, like in the mid-70s, like a sort of semi-disco hit. And then he was an early member of Buggles, and then he split off and got his own deal. So when I met him, he was Bruce Woolley, and we formed a band called Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club. And it was the first time, I'd been in the music industry, like he had a record deal, he had a manager, we were on a wage. It was the first time I ever got paid for doing music. And I learned a heck of a lot from him. He's a lovely singer, a little bit like Sparks, if you remember them.
Love him.
So one of those sort of like most British voices are quite gritty, but every now and then we get a George Michael or a Paul Carrack or somebody like that has that sort of purity of tone.
Polished sort of, yes, absolutely.
And he was an incredible stage presence as well. You should go check out his album. I think he just put out the sort of definitive Bruce Woolley. In fact, so happens I have one right here. Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club. I hope that's the right way around.
It is.
Very charismatic stage performer. We were sort of at the cusp between just before New Romantic, before people like Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet hit big. We were wearing sort of Space Cadet outfits and things and doing sort of power pop. And that my first appearance on Top of the Pops was behind Bruce.
Wow.
I
had no idea. Go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
No, I was gonna say, is this the same Buggles that did Video Killed the Radio Star, the first video on MTV?
So that was written by Bruce and Trevor and Jeff. And when he split off from them, they did their version, and we did our version that was kind of rockier. And their version went to #1 all over the world, and our version didn't even chart. So that was always a bit of an albatross, I think, for Bruce. But I mean, he stayed, very close to Trevor Horn all these years, and has done a lot of stuff with him, like "Slave to the Rhythm" they co-wrote for Grace Jones.
Yeah, I mean, you're just friends with everybody that ever made me want to move to London and just like be there. I almost had a chance to work with Dave Stewart that would have put me there for a while, and I was already thinking, how can I get a dual citizenship out of this? Like, I just
really
everything forward in music was always happening, coming out of London, man. I just
we have this knack of plundering the best stuff from all over the globe and bringing it back and like remarketing it to the world, and people think that we're innovators. It's been going on for hundreds of years.
You beat Paul Simon to the punch. You guys were doing world music before he even got there. You and Peter Gabriel, and you were already
well, I mean, I think that's an example. It's like Malcolm McLaren, speaking of Trevor Horn, went to South Africa, was one of the first people to record African music really well in a great studio, and brought the tapes back to London. And I remember, I was in the session when Trevor slapped the first 2-inch multi-track of a track called Soweto, and I'd heard snippets of high life music, African, South African, West African music, but I'd never heard it well recorded. And in fact, the song "The Flat Earth" came about because Soweto has this great chord sequence, and the chords that I wrote to go on top of it, Trevor sort of like threw them out, and it was too good. The sequence was too good, but that was actually the sequence from "The Flat Earth." The chord sequence was like a sort of which is something that happens a lot in my music, but that was what it was basically. This, Soweto was with Soweto. So the part that I'd written, Trevor didn't use, so I went home and I wrote "The Flat Earth."
Okay, that's recycling.
Yeah.
And
thank God you did.
Yeah.
I mean, and speaking of Flat Earth, I mean, when Hyperactive obviously was probably the biggest single off of that, but it was similar in style to Golden Age of Wireless, but it was an easy, acceptable transition to fans. I mean, are there any stressful memories that you have putting together this album to be a follow-up to Golden Age of Wireless? I mean, were you like really, or were you confident that you were going to be able to pull it off, or was there any bit of nervousness there at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some nervousness because, I finished the Golden Age of Wireless, put it out in the UK. It got great reviews from people like NME and so on, and won a couple of awards and sold about 3 copies. And I was all ready to start recording my second album when I'd done an interim single, which was a double A side, She Blinded Me with Science, and One of Our Submarines. And it came out the first time in the UK, also didn't chart. But the American company heard it and thought that this had a shot in the USA because it started getting played. The 12-inch started getting played in clubs, actually in sort of urban clubs. DJs were spinning it. And they came up with this bright idea of repackaging the Golden Age of Wireless, taking the 2 oldest songs off and replacing them with She Blinded Me with Science and One of Our Submarines. And I had a video for She Blinded Me with Science that got into heavy rotation MTV right at its most sort of powerful period. It had just got into major cities, and cool people were staying at home on a Saturday night to watch MTV instead of, going out to clubs and concerts. So the radio stations, would get all these requests for songs they'd never heard of by the Buggles, by Peter Gabriel, by myself. And so radio, which in the past had been resistant to electronic music, was suddenly playing my stuff. And it was across the board because, meanwhile on the sort of, on the R&B side, you had Africa Bambaataa had sampled Kraftwerk, and this is a little bit before The Message and things like that. But I mean, those cats were getting into drum machines and sampling technology and stuff. So there was this sort of dovetailing of, we're all using the same equipment. And you mentioned world music. I mean, the music of the world was starting to come into a melting pot. The idea that, Africa Bambaataa would sample like these aristocratic German electronic artists, and rap over the top of it, and it'd be a huge hit, sort of urban hit in the US, was, this is really the trigger for the whole melting pot of music that happened in the 80s.
I wish we could go back in time to that, because I feel like everybody is trying to do the same thing. I mean, at least anybody who's got any visibility, it's all just kind of running together now to me.
Yeah, every music today seems really disposable to me.
Yeah,
it just seems like it's here, it's gone.
The spirit of being a maverick is even sort of, I don't know who's even got it anymore. It's because you have to, you push through so many channels and so much, legalism. If you're in the business on that sort of level, I don't know how anybody can break free. Like Michael Jackson couldn't happen in this time. Prince, I mean, really, he did everything he could do, really.
This is a slight pivot, Michael, but I was just, I'm working on a symphonic project right now with samples. And I was remembering an evening I spent at Michael Jackson's house in Encino, California. And it was a very surreal evening. I'd just flown in from London and I had mononucleosis.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, so I had a fever and it was like a foul night in LA. The rain was coming down in buckets. And I did a live TV show where I had to mime To She Blind Me With Science. And I was getting the words wrong because it was the 12-inch version that had been a hit in the States and that had things juggle around. So I was screwing it up. And I had like teenagers down the front row that knew the words and I didn't.
Oh,
and,
boy.
and I had the 105 fever. And afterwards, my entourage from Capitol Records wanted to take me out in the town, to celebrate my song had just gone in the chart.
And you want to go back to the house and just,
I said, no, I arranged to meet a friend tonight, and they said, oh, you want to use the phone? Go ahead. So I'm like, I'm like on the spot. And so I flip open my Filofax. Remember those? And I have one number in LA, one number only. And that's Michael Jackson's number. And I'd met him in London at a video editing suite when he was editing Billie Jean while I was editing She Blind Me With Science. And we chatted a little bit and he gave me his number. I never thought I'd come to use it. But here I was on the spot surrounded by these record company guys. So I call this number thinking, I'll get a service anyway, A little voice goes, hello? And I'm like, Michael? He said, yeah. Are you in LA? And I sort of said, yeah. Where are we? And I said, Burbank, apparently. He said, you want to come over and play? And it's like, righto, okay, fine. Yeah, so the fleet of limos drops me off, outside the gates of his mansion on Havenhurst. And I said, I didn't want to cause a scene, So I said, I'll just hop out here, okay? And the gates open. It's like a glass guardhouse with machine guns. And I walk up the drive, in this torrential rain. It's like a long drive, like 400 yards long. And I walk past the llama enclosure and I walk past the ice cream shop with the life-size diorama of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And by the time I get to the front door of the Jackson mansion, I'm completely drenched, right? And I ring the doorbell a couple of times and I look through the glass panel. This little figure comes traipsing down the stairs in a pink suit, and it's Michael, and he sort of opens the door and looks me up and down, and he's sort of sniggering, and I look like something the cat had dragged in. So I come into his hallway and I'm dripping like pools of pools of water. He hands me a wad of paper towels. So I'm like dabbing myself, and in his entrance foyer he has like this medieval throne that looks like it was built for Henry VIII. So he has to sort of climb up to get into it, like this. And the only other place to sit is an ottoman. So I'm crouching on this ottoman, right? And we start having this conversation, and
surreal.
it's completely surreal, So and we're talking about synclaviers and fairlights, and Marvin Gaye had just died.
Oh boy.
And Michael was sort of saying, oh, so many of the great ones are gone. Otis, Jimmy, now Marvin. He said, when I go, I want to go like Elvis. I'm like,
oof.
How
much foresight do you have?
Yeah, with your pants around your ankles. But I remember talking about music, and you'd be into this, Michael. So he says, well, who are you listening to? I've named some of the people I've named to you.
Sure.
And I said, I'm Prince. I love Prince. This is very early days for Prince, right? And Michael says, Prince is too dirty.
Yeah.
I said, what? What do you mean? He says, you don't want to see that in a hotel lobby.
Oh boy.
I thought this was great.
See,
So anyway,
as he thought he was, he still was listening. That's the funny part.
Oh yeah, no, he was listening. I mean, why wouldn't you be? But so it was just near the end of the evening, and I was really fading fast. I'd been up for like a double day, and I came from London, and I had this fever and everything. And I said, can I call a cab to go home or whatever? I said, I think I've got mononucleosis. And he said, hey, that could be your next hit single.
Mononucleosis. Hey, listen, I bet he could have done it.
Yeah, he could have definitely done it.
Yeah. He might have
actually hyperactive. So
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, so one of the things he said was, so Thriller was out. It wasn't, it's sold a mere like 2 or 3 million albums at that point, but it wasn't global phenomenon yet.
Sure.
Billie Jean was out, but there was like more hit singles from that hour. But he was already talking about the next album he was going to work on, which was Victory with the brothers.
Uh-huh.
And he said that they were already feuding about whose songs got to be on the album. Yeah. And he said, I don't think they're much good, but if you got anything, you should send it to me. So I'm thinking, all right, here we go. So one of the things I went to work on right after that was writing a song for him, and I wrote Hyperactive for Michael to sing.
Wow.
Really?
The lyrics were for him. The the melody is a little bit sort of ABC era Jacksons, I sent him a demo, didn't hear anything for a while. Eventually I called him. I said, what did you think of my song? He said, I like the bass line. That was it.
Well, now that you mentioned,
I'll take that.
I'm thinking he might have thought about that when they were, what is it? Speed Demon? It's got a similar bass sound on it.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, who knows? I mean,
I was having a hard time getting past llama enclosure.
No, I heard that too. I didn't want to fixate on it. I wanted to keep moving.
Yeah. But, one of the things I love about AI technology is it's really good at mashing things up.
Yeah.
So you can use AI technology to split out tracks from their original setting. In fact, I was just doing that with Prince the other day. Let's see if I got it here. So and it'll also find you like lyrical things. So it's like I wanted to do something with a Prefab Sprout song that I produced called Wild Horses, and I have AI in the background is telling me telling me to check out a couple of other things. So it's just constant. It's like a brilliant assistant who is like looking over your shoulder and helping you find interesting connections and things. So let me see here. Yeah. So yes, I've been mashing up these different things. I've been trying to figure out a way to tell this Michael Jackson story like with a symphony behind me.
Oh wow. Okay.
Nice. Well, let me know if you find the file. Because the truth of it is, I'm always shocked when musicians and artists like yourself are really not celebrated more for their contributions to the music industry. I mean, in ways you've done things that people just aren't even aware of. Like I remember the Beatnik software, and how you were creating music files that were very, very difficult to pirate and things like that. And the virtual reality stuff that you tinkered with, and so many other innovations. Do you remember? We're going to talk about AI for a second too, because I'm interested to see how you're working with AI. Would you kind of just shared a little bit, but do you remember any specific moment in your career when you created or stumbled onto like a barrier breaker or something that you programmed in, a technology you helped innovate, sound you created, anything that kind of revolutionizes the way we kind of listen to music? Or is there too many you didn't mention?
Yeah, well, I used to work as a session keyboard player, before I had any sort of a solo career of my own. And I got invited to go to New York and play with Foreigner on Foreigner 4. And it's bizarre because I was completely broke at the time. I was living in Paris working as a street musician. And I got a call from my friend in London saying, yeah, Mick Jones is trying to get a hold of you. And I thought, The Clash, one of my favorite bands.
Yeah, wrong Mick Jones.
The other Mick Jones, who is also a great musician, but not quite in the same wheelhouse.
Really, you'd have been more excited to hear from the other Mick?
Oh yeah, I love the Clash. I'm
okay,
like, I was
right on, man. You're so
kid in London.
You're so seemingly
it's London, yeah.
You're so obviously well educated and erudite, and so for me, it's like I get why you like the Clash. I get why everybody likes the Clash who likes the Clash.
Oh yeah,
it just
absolutely.
You're very funny to me, man, because your music doesn't say a whole lot about your taste sometimes.
I don't know. I mean, I think the golden age of wireless is quite. I think the golden age of wireless is quite punky, actually. And I think I can see that. Yeah, I think
Airwaves, Weightless, those types of songs don't really lend themselves to that really much. But I mean, I think Europa a little bit. I think there's the sequel to Europa, which is called Eastern Bloc. It's sounds quite like a Clash song. It crops up every now and then.
Maybe okay. You know what? I'll give it another go.
It was more the energy of punk. It's like when punk sort of became new wave, and bands like Television, Talking Heads, B-52s came to England, and you realized that it could be so many things.
I got it. Hyperactive was the most exciting thing I heard all year. The year it came out. So I got it. And there's something in your delivery that is definitely punk rock. So I take it back. Yeah. Like when you sing, there's a way you spit out certain words. I've got it, man. I've got it.
Right.
Yeah. So what did you do? I mean, what did you do with 4 and a 4? Because that 4 and a 4 was a huge album. I mean, that
Waiting for a Girl Like You, man.
Jukebox Hero. I mean, Urgent. There was a lot of songs on that album. What did you work on with 4 and a 4?
Yeah, so I played on everything.
Like you with him at the top, I'm sure of it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, I did all the keyboards on that album. They initially just wanted me to come for a couple of days, but they liked what I did, and so I stayed a month. And it was kind of cool. So it's produced by Mutt Lange, right, who is a legendary nitpicker when it comes to music. I mean, it could take him like a month to get a kick drum sound, right?
That was the last word I was expecting him to use, nitpicker. I was just going to say anything else almost.
Right. And he's absolutely, brilliant producer. But so he was working with them, and during the day they were doing Lou Graham's vocals. They were under a deadline to deliver the finished album. And so as an experiment, they'd already put keyboards on the album and they weren't very happy with them. And at night, I would come in and I'd either work in the studio or in a back room with a relief engineer. And they said, just experiment. They'd say, look, you got these 6 tracks, just put some stuff down. We'll come back in the morning and see what we think. So I only had a monophonic synthesizer, right? It was before the days of polyphonic synthesizers. And he had this ballad, Waiting for a Girl Like You. And it basically started with just with a piano thing. And I thought, okay, I want to try some stuff ahead of that. So I was always a big Brian Eno fan. I thought I'm going to try this sort of atmospheric intro before that. But I only had a monophonic synthesizer, meaning one note at a time. So you couldn't do those sort of dreamy, floaty complex chords, right? But I remembered reading that 10cc, the band, had done some of their backing vocals where they would record like everybody singing an ooh, just sustained on a single track of the multi-track, and then using the faders on the desk, they would play chords by pushing faders in and out, right? So I thought, okay, I'll try that with synths. So I went, in the scale of B flat minor, I went through and I recorded some single notes with my mini Moog on the 6 tracks that I had. And then I actually played them with the faders and recorded that off the 2-track. And that was the intro to Waiting for a Girl Like You. I remember them come.
Sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting you, man. My mind is racing. Who moved the faders?
Yeah, so that was me in the back room. So I had faders and I was just pushing them up and playing those notes.
Did you have to memorize which notes were on?
Well,
like,
I knew
it like almost like a keyboard.
Yeah, I was playing it like a keyboard, but I was just pushing faders. I mean, there were no 2 notes that didn't go together, but I just recorded. Sure. I'd hit record on the 2-track and I'd just do a little 30-second intro and then I'd try it again. And I found one that I liked and I just backed up the 2-track tape and put that ahead of the groove that came in.
Sure.
And then when it came in, Mutt sort of said, "This is great," but it's so bright that the track almost sounds a bit dull when it comes in. So we also I can't remember, it may have been Mick that came up with this, but there's also this intro.
Yes.
Right, this is a little rippling thing that goes over. So that comes in with the, to brighten up the track a little bit.
I was going to ask if you wrote that lead line also. You didn't write?
I don't. Wrote that I'm not going to take credit for that. That could have been Mick Jones. I don't remember.
I see.
But it's cool. It's cool with that intro because it's like that song was a huge radio hit, and it was on radio stations that had never heard of Brian Eno, or ambient music. So it was exciting to get something like that onto mainstream radio, and it became a huge hit. And I'd be like in a hotel or like in a rental car in Minneapolis, and I'd turn on the radio, and like in the midst of all of like the FM rock stuff, I'd hear my synth intro, and it's like, oh
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what's amazing to me is that Prince always gravitated towards like-minded music pioneers, people that he was really good friends with Gary Newman. And a lot of people didn't know that, but he hung out with Gary Newman a lot in the early 80s. And I'm really surprised that you two never connected, because it seems like you guys are so like-minded in just kind of being able to kind of push that envelope. Do you not have any association or with Prince at all? Did you ever get an opportunity to meet him or anything?
Yes. So, Michael, what's the name of the club in Minneapolis?
The Glam Slam, probably.
No, something Avenue.
Oh, First Avenue. You met him at First Avenue, maybe? Avenue, okay.
Yeah. So I played there, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a small club, and it's like I come on stage, and it's like the ground floor's packed out, but there's a balcony as well. It's closed off with curtains. I'm thinking, there's like a line around the block. They could have opened the balcony. And I'm halfway through my first song, and the curtains part. And in steps Prince, and he sits down. He's the only person in the balcony. He's got like bouncers either side of him. And he stayed for about 3 songs, making me incredibly self-conscious. And then after about 3 songs, the curtains close again. He's gone. So I never got a chance to figure out, whether he liked what he was hearing. I could imagine listening to my stuff, he'd be intrigued at least. Then the only other experience was like at a party in LA years later when, there's a bunch of celebs there, and he was across the room, and he locked eyes with me, and he made his way towards me, and the crowd sort of parted like the Red Sea, and he whispered in my ear, "It's so good to meet you. I don't believe all the shit Joni told me about you." And then he turned and walked away.
What do you ever figure out what that was about?
Well, there was a brief moment where I think Prince wanted to work with Joni, But he wanted to turn her into a sort of heaving nymphomaniac, the way he had a tendency to do that with sort of chicks are goddesses. He had this way of wanting to sort of corrupt them. So I think he wrote a song for her called as it were, "Lit My Love Pump" or something. And Joni wasn't going for it.
I was trying to remember the name of that song. Yeah,
that's what happened with Bonnie Raitt. Also, he tried to work with her, and she just was too headstrong. She knew what she was doing.
Yeah. But there's a lovely moment in one of his songs where he's like he's wandering around late at night, wanders into a cafe, and the jukebox was playing "Help Me, I Think I'm Falling."
That's right.
Ballad of Dorothy Parker. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, I remember that one. I got a couple more questions for you, and then we're going to move on to listener questions, because I asked listeners, some of the specific things that they wanted to know. But I am curious where the inspiration behind "fruit juice everywhere." Tell me where did that line come from? What was the inspiration for that line?
I had a Parisian girlfriend, and I was working on the lyrics. And I was working on the lyrics for that song, and I was explaining, she said, "Well, what's it about?" So this guy who's like so uptight that he's going to burst a blood vessel, but it's like the irony is that he eats nothing but health food and vitamins and so on, and he's just like so uptight he's going to explode. And she went, "Oh, fruit juice everywhere," and I thought that line is going in my song, and I did actually credit her for it on the album, Elizabeth Omon. I have no idea where she is now.
Yeah, for those who don't know, that song is "Weightless" off of Golden Age Wireless. Yeah. Every time I hear when that comes on, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, because I literally have this CD in constant rotation on my CD player, and every time that comes, if I could be in the middle of a report, and I'll just be like, "Fruit juice everywhere." I don't know why.
That's kind of what conjured this whole situation up. Was he was listening to Golden Age of Wireless, and I had just listened to Aliens Ate My Buick on Spotify like the day before, and then I moved right into Flat Earth, and I was just kind of there. And we both happened to mention that we were listening to Thomas Dolby. And he says, "Oh, he was on my show once a long time ago." I said, "Well, have him on again."
And here we are.
Yeah, we were both so surprised that you went, "Well, I've got nothing on Tuesday. Let's try it."
And speaking of which, the last time you were on in 2012, the last time you and I spoke, you were doing a concert tour for a Map of the Floating City. It wasn't called a Map of the Floating City tour, though. It was a time, but you were bringing a time capsule to every single one of your stops. I guess people, I think I actually have a photo of that, but there was a time capsule that you kept bringing. You took to all your, and people could get in and record different things, different messages and stuff inside of this. Whatever happened to this time capsule, and what happened to the recordings that the fans recorded in this thing?
Yeah. So, we would park it on the street, where the line was to get into the gig. And we had a couple of sort of lovely steampunkettes who would show you how to do it. But if you wanted to, you could sit in the back and you could record a 30-second video message to the future. So when we towed it behind the tour bus, it was like a sort of H.G. Wells time machine. And then we uploaded a bunch of the clips to YouTube. I don't know if they're still up there. But we got a few celebs in there, just regular people. Some of them would just talk about my music. Some of them would say, well, when aliens take over the planet, I want them to know this, or post the apocalypse, if they ever find this tape, I want you to know this. And people came up with some very interesting ideas.
Has there ever been like you thought about doing like a compilation or something? I know you said some is up on YouTube, but like maybe like, a project now that this is 10 plus years in its prime, where you can kind of be able to take, I'm not like documentary of sorts, but some type of project that kind of like puts all of those pieces together and maybe do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking for sort of new ideas. I mean, one of the things about me is that I'm most happy when I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So it's like when I wrote a book, when I first made a music video, when I made a film, when I started teaching, I was sort of clueless, so I enjoy the process of going from dummy to expert. And an area where I'm already an expert is less appealing to me. It's less stimulating to me than something where I don't know what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's a risky endeavor because, it's like, well, who would want to go back to being a newbie? But to me, it's like to just repeat the same formula that's worked for you in the past is completely uninteresting. It's like when I get into something new and fumble around to find myself in there, in that genre, in that medium, in that technology, that's a really fascinating time for me.
And where is that time capsule now?
Oh, I auctioned it on eBay and gave the money to charity. So that there's a local, so I live in Baltimore, right? So there's a nonprofit that I work for here called Living Classrooms, which basically provides a way for kids after school to get into the recording studio and learn how to make their own beats and record vocals and
Cool.
record their rhymes, and then we teach them how to use, like a lot of them, even some pretty poor kids, they've got access to a smartphone or a laptop or something like that. And I say, right there in that device, you could be making your own record, So we try and give them those skills. And I wanted to donate the time capsule to the nonprofit to tour around Baltimore and go to some places and let people record in it. And they said, don't do that. It would last about a night before it would get completely destroyed. Like in the morning, all the wheels would be ripped off and everything would be gone. And so instead I sold it on eBay and I gave them the money instead. But yeah, some happy camper has got it.
Well, I don't want to ask you whether you like living in Baltimore. I think a lot of people who live in Baltimore, well, some of them, I've been there. That place is rough, man. I've been to Baltimore.
It's got some rough neighborhoods. You need to know, where to go and where not to go, but it's also got some gorgeous parts. If I chose to just only hang out where I live or where I work, you'd think it was paradise. But
right.
Interestingly, a lot of American cities are like that, right? But it's especially good here because the area where I live was built by, revolutionary sailors, the shipyards around here, the brothels, the bars they used to go to, like the Revolutionary era sailors. I'm just across from Fort McHenry, where you repelled the British invasion in 17 something.
I see.
But and then where I work at Peabody is this gorgeous, mid 19th century building, incredible architecture around there. It's where all the rich merchants from the harbor used to go. But if you take a wrong turn, you're in the wire.
I guess just don't develop a crack habit there, Thomas.
You're in the wire.
Just stay off the crack.
There's no risk of that. But no, it's like, I used to take the bus to work, and it's like if the 11 bus came, I'd see nothing but gorgeousness. The 13 bus came, I'd end up in the same place, but I saw like the methadone clinic, the courthouse, the burned out buildings with no roofs, the food desert, and so that stuff is all around you. But I'll tell you one thing that's interesting about a city this size, and Minneapolis may be the same. Most people, even comfortable people that I talk to, are doing something for the community. It's like New York, LA, London, people are looking after number one, it's like, and if I mentioned this nonprofit in one of those cities, people would like move on because I'm no use to their career. Right. But, here people go, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I coach soccer, for Living Classroom. Oh, wow, that's interesting, or like I helped out with this charity show that we put on, down on the harbor last year and raising money for inner city kids to go on summer camp or a lot of people I talk to, whether it's Uber drivers, fellow teachers, they care about the fact that they are part of this community. And there's just a general sense that the strong and the rich should be helping the weak and the poor, right? But that is a sentiment that by and large is hard to find in America to me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The
poor got so much heart.
Less so now. Yeah, less so now than ever,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. You want to do the list? We've got some listener questions.
No, wait a minute, man.
Okay, let's do it then. Go ahead.
Thomas probably has to be going pretty soon, so I'll be very short. Do you believe in God?
Interesting question.
Yeah, I'm affirming certain things in my mind about just the impression I've gotten because I don't know you. I only know you through your work. So, yes, okay.
I'll
That
follow
was-
that up by saying that I don't think science and medicine and knowledge is like a finished article yet. It's like 100 years ago, there's a lot of stuff that a doctor or a scientist wouldn't have known the answer to. They would have poo-pooed it as being, superstition. And now we know, So another 100 years from now, if there's anything left at all, we're going to know a lot of shit that we don't know today, right? So a lot of stuff today is sort of poo-pooed. And I think a lot of that actually may be in the realms of sort of, beyond physics. So it's like when you ask, like how come a mother knew that her kid was suffering halfway across the planet, or how come twins separated at birth still have this relationship, or how come animals understand each other and they can sense our moods, they know when an earthquake's coming, they know when you're going to have a seizure. There's no scientific explanation for those things, right? So I don't discount the invisible because there's no proof of it, right? But if you ask me if I believe in God, that suggests to me that there is a single consciousness somewhere that has a plan for things. I don't believe that.
Okay. Well, I definitely was not trying to convert you. I was just.
You'll get the pamphlet in the mail.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Have you heard the good news, Thomas? Right. Oh, I also wanted to ask if you knew John Altman. Do you know John Altman?
I do not.
Okay.
No, there you go.
Yeah.
Two
right.
quick answers.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, it's just, I can't, I could ask you scores of questions about intimate details about your work harmonically, but I don't want to press you.
A lot of drummers want to know how I got the drum sound on Pulp Culture.
No, I don't. It's okay.
Okay, good.
So
Yeah,
we don't need to repeat her. Yeah, the answer is that.
That'd be the least of my questions, and it would have nothing to do with drumming at all.
Okay.
I have perfect pitch. I don't brag about it because most people don't know what it is. So when I'm hearing your music, I'm hearing it for what it is and not some sort of secondary interpretation. Like I understand what's going on musically, which is really, I've got a lot of questions. But mostly yeah. I just think you're really great. And I had one other question, which was, did you ever work with Kate Bush at all?
No, I never worked with Kate Bush. That's another one, there's only a handful of people that I really grew up with and sort of admire top to bottom that I never got to work with. Most of them, I'm lucky enough that I worked with them. But no, I bumped into Kate. We used to be on the same label, EMI, but I've never worked with her, no.
Okay. Who got the Fairlight first? Was it you or her or
I think she did. I think I had and Peter Gabriel got his as well. I think Trevor Horn got one as well. I got like the 5th or 6th one into the UK. So, it's like you couldn't help but be a pioneer in those days because nobody else could afford that machine. I mean, my first Fairlight cost me £80,000. And
that's double in so that's
my first record company advance was 100,000. The other 20,000 bought me a flat in central London.
All right.
So I spent 80K on the Fairlight and 20K on a flat in central London. I'm sort of wishing I'd bought 5 flats in central London instead, because it's like there's a Fairlight app on this for like $5, which basically does everything the Fairlight used to do.
Wow.
Yeah, I think you had told a story in your book about Michael Jackson coming to one of your shows, and he was enamored by I think there was a specific key. Was it the Fairlight that you had on stage, and you was like really just like taken aback that you had this $90,000 keyboard sitting on your stage? I think it was. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, I mean, just being
it was
the cost of being an innovator.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Was it?
so I mean, one of the things about being the first to dive in to something is that people will write the history books, as if this was what sparked it. But in fact, I'm not really an innovator. I think I'm just an early adopter more than anything.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I also wanted to ask you whether or not you thought which is more fun for you, producing or being an artist?
I think you can be both. I think, for example, there's this band Prefab Sprout that I produce.
I have it. I have the record.
Okay, so I love their music. I'd say that I tried to do for them sort of what George Martin did for the Beatles, where he was not Lennon and McCartney, but he was able to give them tools and a context to put their songs in, with the knowledge and experience that he had. And I think it was similar. I was a little bit sort of ahead of them in terms of I'd been in the studio, made an album, worked with bands, and so I was able to sort of steer them. And the first stuff before I worked with them was incredible, but a little bit too didactic, a little bit too complicated. You couldn't really groove to it. It was too many time changes and key changes and things like that. And so the first work I did with them really was in the rehearsal studio, where you just sort of simplify things. And
Sure.
Paddy was one of those writers. He'd write his lyrics and he'd sit there with a guitar and he'd strum his guitar and he'd sing the lyrics as they came up. But if he added like an extra beat to a bar, or he had added an extra, there's like this phrase is 7 bars, this one is 5, he would just strum until it felt right to sing. And then when he sang in the middle of a melody, if it felt like he was going too low, he'd jump up an octave and things like that. And he wasn't really aware of doing this, and it sounded incredible. But when you add all the other instruments into it, it compounded the issues, if you see what I mean. So it's like we took it back to the drawing board and we rehearsed them until it sounded really good, in a rehearsal room. And it was about the arrangement. And so if you have a great arrangement, as you know, Michael, you go into a studio and with a good engineer, you mic it up and it sounds like a record, right? But if you got to polish the turd, if you got to build things in building blocks, it ain't going to work, And there are people that are great at that as well, like a Trevor Horn type of person that can just layer things and, have several mixes going on. Like we're going to chop to that at the chorus. Like he really makes a sort of collage. And then there are other people more like a Steve Lillywhite, a Bob Clearmountain, who, given a band that sounds great in a rehearsal room, they can turn it into a great record.
Yeah. Great answer. Thank you.
All right, let's do the listener questions. Nadine Rivers Johnson asks, what was it like working with Belinda Carlisle and how did that come about?
I don't remember how it came about. And we were neighbors in the Hollywood Hills. She, like me, was married to an actor. She was married to James Mason's son. I don't know if they're still together. And they just asked me when they were recording Heaven is a Place on Earth. And I wasn't a member of the union at the time. And I just sort of said, well, there's this new Roland keyboard I want to try out called a D50. If you let me leave with that at the end, then I'll do the session for you. So I came down, I just played on 2 songs, Heaven is a Place on Earth and Circle in the Sand.
Wow.
And you walked out with the D50 under your arm?
Yeah.
Nice.
That's awesome.
All right.
I had a big 19-inch rack, Michael, and it had in it a sampler and a synth and a mixer and a MIDI keyboard going into it because I wanted to be able to blend samples and synthesize sounds.
Oh, sure.
And then Roland came out with it. It was the first keyboard that came out, which basically did that. It had like a front end that was sampled and then the rest was synthesized. And so I was jonesing for that keyboard.
No, there were 2 or 3 D50s at Paisley Park when I first got there. And then I think what happened, the JV, Roland put something out, and then Prince was just like, "Oh, I'm into this now." It was yeah.
Next question, J. David Silva asked, I would like to know Thomas's thoughts on the legacy of his dynamic performance with David Bowie at Live Aid in July of 1985.
Well, the legacy was a happy memory for me, really. I'd grown up with Bowie's music, as had most British musicians of my generation. We'd sort of followed him through the twists and turns. And I think when he went to electronic music and went to Berlin with Eno and did Low and Heroes and so on, that was really the pivotal moment for me, really. And you mentioned Gary Newman. It's like a couple of years after that, there was Gary Newman on Top of the Pops doing electronic pop music and having a hit. But unlike Bowie, who was already a superstar, Gary was like the kid next door who put on some eyeliner and got a hairbrush and was singing in front of the mirror. It's like, but it was great because it was like this DIY thing. It's like, wow, anybody, any little geek can get up on stage and be a pop star now. That was really inspiring. In terms of Live Aid.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I watched some footage of Gary Newman performing like last year. He was incredible.
Yeah,
like he's got these tall, scary dudes playing guitar and bass, and it's like the visual. He had everything together, man. And it's if he comes to town, I think I've got to see him.
Yeah. Last question, Simon Stone. How was it producing Houdini? Do you have any fond memories? Also, what drum machines and synths were used on the Houdini project?
I'm glad somebody remembered.
I never met them. I still never met them to this day. I believe there's one of the original members is still around. My publisher in the UK was Zomba, which is a company Mutt Lange, founded with a couple of other South African dudes. And they had studios, very good studios, Battery Studios. And when the studios had downtime, they would send their artists in and just say, just jam, just make some beats. But they probably weren't called beats in those, so just come up with some stuff. So I came up with the groove for Magic's Wand, and they sent the tracks to New York, and they'd found this couple of young rappers to rap on top of it. And that was that. We never met. But I still, certain DJs, if I walk in the room, they're like, "Oh, I am not worthy. I am not worthy." And I expect they're going to say Primary Science, or they're going to say Screen Kiss or Pulp Culture or whatever. They go, Magic's One, man. That's just like, it's never off my turntable. So yeah,
that's awesome.
So you wrote and produced Houdini?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do the vocals, but I did the backing tracks, wrote and produced them in London and sent them over to New York. Yeah. Okay.
Was it just Magic's Wand, or did you? I for some reason I thought you were involved in 5 Minutes of Funk, but I guess maybe not.
I don't know. There was a couple of different versions. I mean, in those days, you would spin off a few different versions for different mixes, and I don't know where they ended up.
Right. Well, let me just say it has been an honor having you here. I know you got to go. Thank you for being so gracious with your time. And of course, we can't let you go without promoting these two amazing books. For those who don't know, you had a book a little while ago called The Speed of Sound, Breaking the Barriers Between Music and Technology, that came out quite a bit ago. But your brand new book, Prevailing Wind, is out now as well. It's great that these are out there, because I've always been a fan of your writing style, and just it's good to have it. And if anybody is curious, head to funkatopia.com/Dolby. Again, that's funkatopia.com/Dolby. You'll be taken to the Amazon page where you can pick up either one of these in any format that you want. And again, I cannot state enough how much of an honor it is to have you here. Again, thank you so much for being gracious with your time. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the
Thanks
only.
for having me. And Michael, very nice to meet you. I hope we bump into each other again.
And listen, I'm trying to figure out how I can raise enough money to have you do some overdubs.
Oh, and you know what? Before you go, is there any way I could get a bumper from you to say, this is Thomas Dolby and you're listening to Funkatopia? That would be great to have on the radio show.
Sure. You're listening to, what was it?
Funkatopia.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Hello there. My name is Thomas Dolby, and you're listening to Funkatopia.
Perfect. That's me on the radio. Legends right there.
That
all
was
right.
Really.
Thanks, guys. Really nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for everything. We appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Thomas, thank you so much, brother. Thank you. All right, man.
Wow, that was a trip, man.
Yeah, I kind of
Sorry,
felt like
man. It's like I turned like 12
I
years
know.
old. Like, oh, and what about the and tell me about the
See, this was your opportunity to fanboy. I
yeah.
did that 13 years ago. I was the same way. I was like, and what's crazy is that I remember the interview being so much longer when I had done it 13 years ago, and I listened to it now when it's like literally was only 20 minutes. I was like, man, it seemed like it was. I mean, you get 20 minutes with a musical visionary, and it's like I'm just, poof, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, my mind is still sort of just
yeah, it's crazy. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to our interview here with Thomas Dolby. Guys, hope you had a phenomenal time and that you got a little bit out of that you may have not gotten on his previous interviews. We will see you guys the following Tuesday. We will check it out and see. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Once again, I am Mr. Christopher. That is my co-host, Mr. Michael Bland.
yes.
And we'll see you soon. Adios, amigos y amigas. Talk to you later.